Good morning, everybody. My name is Theo. I am a PhD candidate at Ryukoku University in Kyoto, and I have been writing a dissertation about the internationalization of Japanese universities. And today, I will be examining internationalization of higher education in Wales, primarily, and also making some comparison to Japan. Now, you might be wondering, first of all, well, why Wales, right, of all the places? Well, I had the opportunity to do a research visit to the Graduate School of Social Sciences at Cardiff University as a visiting scholar from January to March 2020, which gave me the opportunity to collect some data in the UK and at UK universities. And now I decided to focus specifically on Wales because, well, since I had only a couple of months for the fieldwork, it was more manageable in terms of in time and resources to focus on those 8 universities in Wales, as opposed to 150 almost in the whole UK. Also, there is a lack of in-depth qualitative studies on the internationalization of Welsh universities in general. Now we will talk about some policy trends and issues in internationalization in the United Kingdom generally. And this trend has been very much towards neoliberalization and marketization. The governmental funding for universities has dropped significantly from almost 35% in 2009 to less than 15% in 2017. And this went in parallel with an increase from the university's income from tuition fees from the students. So less than 13% in 2009 to around 48% in 2019. Furthermore, the 1980, so the introduction of full tuition fees for international students, and these fees in 2014-15 accounted for 14% of total university income. And as you can see from this graph here, in 2014-15, about 20% of all students in the UK were international in the universities, and most of these were higher fee paying non-EU students. Now, more recent figures give the percentage of international students around 22.3% in the United Kingdom, which makes it third in the world. Another aspect of marketization is just a moment here. Okay. Another aspect of marketization has also been the government's policies aimed at encouraging domestic competition among universities. And here we have a policy in 2015, which removed the cap on the numbers of students that universities could recruit, meaning that basically universities could recruit as many students as they liked, which basically drastically increased the competition for domestic students in the university sector. Okay, now the international strategy of the UK government has been framed within a neoliberal imaginary of global competition and increasing educational exports to 35 billion per year and branding not just individual universities, but the higher educational system of the UK as a whole under different brand names such as Education UK, Britain is Great, and so on, as described in Loomer and colleagues. This trend towards neoliberalization went hand in hand with one towards nationalization and what has become known as the hostile environment policy. Now, as part of this policy, international students have been included into net migration figures as easy targets to curb migration numbers to the UK. And in fact, as you can see from this quote, the post-study work visa, which allowed international students in the UK to stay 2 years after their graduation and seek employment, had been terminated in 2011. And now it has been reintroduced, I believe, last year. However, in the meantime, we saw a drop in the numbers of students switching from study visa to a different visa category, right? So who returned home after, so had to return home after their graduation from a British university. So as you can see from this graph. Okay, so now my research question for this study was, how do Welsh universities and their stakeholders conceptualize and implement internationalization against the backdrop of increasing marketization and nationalization in UK higher education? The fieldwork was quite challenging in that within 6 weeks, we had 3 faculty strikes in the universities, which are not the best conditions for doing fieldwork at universities. 2 major floods in Wales, and also the beginning of the pandemic towards the end of the fieldwork. So I could barely collect even half of the data I hoped for. Nevertheless, the design was a multiple case study with a purposeful sampling technique aimed at including both so-called old research-oriented universities and newer institutions which gained university status after 1992. Now, the study sample included 4 universities and 13 research participants. This is all in Wales, and these included the heads of international recruitment and global opportunities, the deans for international, so-called international lead faculty in the departments, international student advisors, and also the management of Global Wales, which is a partnership of different governmental organizations in Wales aimed at promoting Welsh universities in key strategic markets abroad. So Vietnam, India, the US, and so on. So now the theoretical framework that I'm using is resource dependence theory, which states that organizations are dependent on other social actors in their environment, which provide them with those resources which are key for their survival, including financial, material, and symbolic resources also. And organizations can secure a stable flow of key resources through different tactics, ranging from mergers with the organization providing the key resource to finding alternative suppliers of a key resource. Fast forward to data analysis. While the management at Global Wales seemed to imply that there was increasing uncertainty in Welsh higher education generally. And the main reasons for these were, first of all, visa restrictions, right? So the disappearance of the post-study work visas for international students in 2012. And here I quote, even though the UK grew by 2%, in Wales, international recruitment declined, so was underperforming. Again, Brexit was another major concern. If we lose our EU student intake, what happens then? So the whole point of this, of Global Wales, was to mitigate against the loss, enable us to go to non-European countries. Furthermore, also demographics is increasingly an issue in the UK, as in Japan, although not to that extent. So the number of 18-year-olds in 2020 will be at its lowest, and then it goes up again to 2030. So they will need, in the short term, the universities will need to look at the deficit and replenish it with international students. Also, environmental sustainability was also a cause of concern. So how to balance this desire for profitability in university existence, right? And the dependence on international student fees versus all the flights and the carbon footprint of the university. Okay, so now the first case study institutions that I visited was Western University, and this is of course a pseudonym, and this is an old research-oriented institutions with an international student population a little more than 20%, and with goals that revolve mainly around increasing its research output for internationalization and its number of strategic partnerships. Which are partnerships across all schools and disciplines. Also, the staff had quite positive attitudes towards internationalization. Here I quote, there is an overall understanding that the university has to be international. It has so many benefits that it seems ludicrous to mention it. Okay, so now why is the university internationalizing? What does internationalization mean for Western University? Well, first of all, it was about financial resource dependence on international students' fees. Again, we need to internationalize to survive, although nobody agreed with introducing fees. Don't follow the philosophy, follow the money. With funding leaving us because we're leaving the EU, that money needs to be replenished by another means, so that's mainly international students. However, it was also about symbolic resources, such as global status and reputation, that is using internationalization to gain a higher global rank, right, in global rankings. By definition, a world-class university is international. It's a given for us. It's also about getting the university's brand out there, which the best universities in the UK do, Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, St. Andrews, etc. Now, furthermore, another rationale for internationalization was domestic recruitment, which is also linked to graduate employability, and these two aspects compensate each other in a way. So it is a competitive market in the UK. So we want students to choose to come to Western University. So we can definitely use internationalization as a recruitment tool. And any student that goes on a placement abroad is more employable, right? And finally, it also meant meeting global challenges through these international linkages, right? By fostering global research initiatives that aim to promote economic development and address these global challenges. Okay, so the second case university that I will be presenting here is Eastern University, so a post-1992 research-oriented institution with an international population at around 9% when I visited, and a strategy which aimed primarily at increasing and diversifying its international student cohort, increasing study abroad, double degree programs, transnational education. And this is a institution established as a university 7 years ago, so quite different from from Western University, which you looked at previously. Now, what does internationalization mean for Eastern University? Well, again, financial resource dependence on international students was a key rationale. It is very much about the commercial needs of the university and diversifying income. I think part of that may be related to some of the current challenges that are faced in higher education in Wales, reducing numbers of local students. It's very much about the commercial side, and then we get to do the other. And again, also financial dependence on domestic students' fees, again, so, and employability of graduates. So the industries that we are representing are very international, so our graduates have got to be prepared to work with very diverse groups and to collaborate perhaps all around the world. Okay, so now I mentioned previously that this trend towards neoliberalization, towards increasing dependency of the universities on students' fees for their survival, goes in parallel with a trend towards nationalization, particularly in immigration policy. And indeed, many of the international student advisors they talk to brought the issue of visas and students having problems renewing their visas and the adverse effect that had both on the students and the university. I've had international students questioning, why are they making it so hard? Why don't you want an international student to come to your university? Sometimes we turn in two directions. We want to help students, but we can't go against the rules of the university imposed by the Home Office. Again, when the Home Office is asking for ridiculous amounts of money to support your family, who spends £680 a month on one child? So I do often find myself asking those questions. Why on earth have you picked this country to come here? So the UK is not looking very friendly anymore, is some of the statements I managed to gather on this topic. Now, how to make sense of this? Well, one possible way to look at this is through Apodry's idea of disjunctions or contradictions between different dimensions of global flows of people, ideas, and policies. On the one hand, we have ethnoscapes, so increasing international student mobility to the UK, with students attracted by the high symbolic value of British university degrees, which are in a way in contradiction with an ideoscape, which revolves around growing nationalist and anti-immigrant sentiments across Europe, as we saw in the hostile environment policy for immigrants and how that affected international students. And again, these two are sort of a disjuncture with a policyscape, which frames universities within a neoliberal perspective and makes the institutions dependent on fees of international students in particular, right? And promoting this competition at home and abroad. Now, well, what about Japan then? So how does Japan compare to the situations we saw in Wales? Well, first of all, I will start briefly by talking about the private universities. Now, around 76% of the total of universities in Japan are private, and the vast majority of these are non-elite institutions, right? And and these universities are highly dependent on Japanese students' fees, which accounted for nearly 75% of their total revenue in 2017. On the other hand, internationalization is seen as a financial loss because international students pay the same, if not lower, tuition fees than Japanese students, right? And these universities cannot afford to charge higher fees to international students since, arguably not many would come, right? Also, the inaccessibility of governmental funding for most of these non-elite universities. In fact, the Top Global University Project for Internationalization includes only 5% of all universities in Japan, right? With the aim of transforming these institutions into hubs for internationalization. So we can make a case that most non-elite private universities in Japan simply lack the means and the incentives to internationalize in any meaningful way whatsoever. Now, at the other side of the spectrum, we have the elite national universities. And here I'm talking primarily about the 7 former imperial universities. The total percentage of national universities in Japan is around 12%, although here I am concentrating on those few most elite institutions, right, which compete in the global rankings. Now, national universities are financially dependent on governmental funding, which provides 40% of their running costs, although this is decreasing each year. And also they are not allowed to engage in for-profit activities, such as, for example, charging fees for exchange students on summer programs, right? Which makes them even more dependent on governmental funding for their operation. Furthermore, they are dependent on symbolic resources such as prestige and legitimacy, which are increasingly tied to seeking global conformity with this westernized narrative of excellence in the world-class university, which again is increasingly tied to well, scoring high on global rankings and internationalization being part of it. So according to my research in Japan, despite there is strong internal resistance within more elite national universities towards internationalization in Japan, leadership perceive that they have almost no choice but to internationalize in order to secure both these financial resources from the government and symbolic resources which are deemed critical for these universities' survival, right? So what we saw is a very different situation, therefore, between universities in Wales, where the high resource dependence on international students' fees meant that internationalization was highly prioritized, to a situation in Japan where the majority of universities, being non-private elite institutions, actually have very few incentives to engage in any sort of major internationalization efforts, right? So these are the references that I used. So I will just go through them slowly so you can take a look. It's free. Okay, so that's it for me. I think we're just at 20 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. So I leave the floor to the next speaker.
Okay, so we have some time for questions. So please feel free to hold on a little bit. I cannot see all of you yet.